Commerce Secretary just came out and said the 25% tariffs will stay in place, despite the Prime Minister's concession after concession.
What we have at this point with the United States for the auto sector is the lowest tariff in the world, and we are still negotiating because, as the President said yesterday, the Prime Minister of Canada is a tough negotiator. We will get a great deal.
Jean Charest is a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Canada-U.S. Relations and a former Quebec Premier and, of course, a former Deputy Prime Minister. Jean Charest, good to see you. Thanks for being here again today, sir.
Thank you, David.
I have a bit of whiplash on Canada-U.S. relations. We saw a very friendly meeting in the Oval Office yesterday, but now we have reporting and sources telling us that Howard Lutnick told a Toronto conference Canada is not going to get a U.S. trade deal without tariffs, and he made other threatening comments about the auto sector. What are we supposed to make of all of this?
It's not going to be a straight line, that's for sure. We made, I think we made progress yesterday from all the reports I heard. It was a good meeting, a warm meeting. Of course, everyone heard the public comments of President Trump, and personal relations always count, David, but even more for President Trump. I think the instructions were given to start negotiating on specific issues like steel and aluminum and energy. Autos, the President in his public statements yesterday was pretty clear that on autos he thinks this is something that's exclusive to the United States. But the world is not that simple. The supply chains are very, very much tied in one to the other. It would take tens of years to redo the supply chain and cost hundreds of billions of dollars. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars. So it's easy to say that. And we get it. I mean, the Americans would like to have more American content and do fine. In an ideal world, maybe that happens somewhere. But the real life is that there's no complex product in the world that's made in a single country. It doesn't exist anymore. And so we hear the rhetoric, but frankly, there's still a long ways to go on autos so that we can end up at a place that's reasonable for everyone.
I mean, there's a long way to go, but a lot of damage can be done along the way, right? And that's the big concern because, Howard Lutnick basically said auto assembly is going to be done in America, full stop. We're going to be first. You can be second if you go along and leverage your adjacency. But he also suggested you're not going to get a trade deal without tariffs. I don't know if that means the sectoral tariffs or if he means a baseline that they're going to try to bake into CUSMA.
Well, we anticipated, I think, that we're looking at a world with some forms of tariffs simply because that's what President Trump believes in, period, full stop. But, in between that and there could be a quota system. He doesn't like quotas, but there could be a quota on steel and then a tariff kicks in. The important part for us, and by the way, let's not lose sight of the fact that the big prize for us. What is the big prize? Protecting CUSMA. That is the thing of everything else that we want to protect and preserve. And then the others are also important. But if we're able to secure that, then we're in a better position than the rest of the world. And then it's a matter of having something reasonable that, by the way, is not going to unhinge the American economy on steel and aluminum or even energy or even autos because they're hurting themselves. And one of the sectors that is hurting the most in the United States because of the tariffs on steel and aluminum is the automotive sector. They're the ones who are suffering from this. So at one point that will catch up with the administration.
Right, but the focus of the conversations yesterday, as everyone has said publicly, was making progress on steel and aluminum and finding some sort of relief for those sectors, if possible. But if auto, as you point out, aluminum and things are a key part of that, how can you do a deal on one when the other is still under threat? You know what I mean? By giving them steel and aluminum they need, do you make it easier for them to be predatory when it comes to our auto sector?
Well, and it isn't one or the other. They're all, frankly, they're linked. They're linked. You cannot build automobiles today in North America without access to either steel or aluminum at good prices, reasonable prices, by the way, competitive prices, which is exactly what Canada offers in their relationship with the United States. And if you do that, well, the American market for cars, by the way, is what, 15, 16 million cars a year? We produce 1.3 million cars a year, and we export most of it to the United States of what we do export. Some of it is for our domestic market, of course. So when Mr. Lutnick says, well, you're number 2, well, you know, in the numbers, yes, we are, and they've always been that way. That's not new to us. The real question is, what is best for Canada and the United States? What is it that we should be doing together that's in their interest and our interest? And getting rid of tariffs is the ideal thing. Also being able to supply each other with inputs that are competitive and much cheaper than it would be otherwise is what makes sense for everyone.
No, this all makes perfect, logical, economic, and trade sense. It's just, it doesn't seem to be what they want. You know, when you hear the president speak about countries, they're either a competitor, a customer, or a supplier. He rarely talks about them as a partner. And what they were trying to do yesterday, I think, in the Oval Office was get it back to that point. And what we're being told is to do that, the Prime Minister raised the concept of maybe they can take another look at Keystone. On the energy side, if they can get some movement on things, that this is an example of the partnership. I mean, what do you make of that? Because the TC Energy subsidiary that handled Keystone earlier this year said they'd moved on. They're now telling us that they support efforts to find solutions that increase the transportation of crude. I mean, in business speak, that's a shift. I mean, how do you view this?
Well, I can tell you, in the years where Keystone was an issue, it's probably ate up 60% of all the reporting about Canada in that period of time, whether in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. And by the way, Obama said no to Keystone. And then Mr. Trump, on the first day of Trump 1.0, he says yes to Keystone. And Biden gets elected, says, first day, no to Keystone. So we're back to Keystone. I can't blame TransCanada for saying we have sunk hundreds of millions of dollars into this. You know, show me the path. And so, but it would make, you know, eminent sense for the Americans to be able to have access to this energy. If they want to build, by the way, they want to build data centers, which consume a huge amount of energy, of which they don't have. Well, you know what? We do have the energy in Canada to supply them. And there's a good example of what makes sense for them and makes sense for us. But again, and you pointed it out, there's nothing conventional about President Trump and the administration. There's nothing that's going to happen in the ordinary course of business or negotiations. But you just make incremental process as you go along. And the good news is that yesterday, progress was made.
Yeah, well, you know, yesterday, the president said they could either renegotiate or separate USMCA, CUSMA, and split it into other deals. Howard Lutnick referenced that again, the idea of a bilateral arrangement, said today he thinks Canada should cut Mexico out. I mean, is there a path where the Trilateral agreement survives without massive concessions? Because it seems they're just determined to do one-on-one deals and leverage their economy against the weaker partner.
And what are they really talking about? They see themselves as a superpower who has more to gain by having one-on-one negotiations than dealing in a multilateral setting. Now, we've had that discussion in Canada, and there's an agreement in this country, and I think a realization that we're in a better position if we're at the table with Mexico. It makes sense for us. It makes sense for them also. And by the way, if the Americans want to undo CUSMA, the economic consequences of that, David, are extremely, extremely grave. And it's not like the deal with Europe, which is also important, but our supply chains are intimately linked. And if there's one thing I believe, though the administration won't say this, they know that if they undo CUSMA, the reaction in the marketplace is not going to be good, because this is not good news for the American economic sector to do it. So we're not going to get there, you know, it's not going to be a straight line, but as long as we keep moving the ball forward and having discussions, and I think we should rejoice in the fact that on steel and aluminum, we're now in a position where both governments have given instructions to their teams to negotiate. That's something we didn't have the day before. Well, then we're at least going in the right direction.
Former Quebec Premier Jean Charest, I always appreciate your time, appreciate your insight. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
What really matters is that we are all fighting to get the best possible deal for Canada. All of us, all Canadians, all parliamentarians, and obviously the Prime Minister and the government, we're fighting to get the best possible deal for Canada.
I think any time that the Prime Minister is speaking to the President is a good day. They obviously have respectful dialogue, but also respectful disagreement. I don't buy the garbage that we have to come back with any deal. I think if we have a deal, it's got to be a good deal, and if we don't have one right now, then I think Canadians, we all need to be patient and get ready to dig in.
Okay, in Toronto today, Ontario Premier Doug Ford appears to be losing some patience with the current government, and he wants Canada to start hitting Trump back and hitting hard.
We have to use our leverage. We have to use our strengths. As President Trump wants to destroy our auto sector, take down our steel sector, go after our manufacturing sector, we can't sit back and let President Trump continuously increase tariffs and the Prime Minister's decreasing tariffs. That doesn't cut it.
Okay, Jordan, I want to talk about this because Flavio Volpe on the show earlier worried about what's happening with auto, not listed as a priority by the federal government yesterday in Washington, and Howard Lutnick saying it's all changing. We're making cars and you're going to have to live with it. Lana Payne, president of Unifor, saying publicly she feels the auto sector is being thrown under the bus. You see Doug Ford there. Wab Canoe on the show last night saying, what are we getting for these concessions when we give up digital services tax, when we get up this? There is an unease spreading on the lack of change.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to see the difference between this visit and the one that happened at the beginning of the summer. The standards are different. I think that in that instance, it made sense for the Prime Minister to be judged on how did that meeting go? Did he kind of survive the bear pit? You know, that was in the immediate wake of the Zelensky debacle. And so the bar was different. It was how was he going to handle 51st state rhetoric? And he was able there to get through that, and that was sort of what people were looking for. Well, that's changed. So, you know, now Canada has unemployment over 7%. People are losing their jobs. Businesses are going under, and we're headed into a recession. You know, with great respect to Mark Miller, who I quite like a lot and I think is very smart, he knows very well that it is not garbage that Canadians would expect some sort of a deal or relief from these tariffs that are really harming the industry. And I think that the challenge that the government has, and you can see this in some of the media availabilities that have happened after this meeting, is that they've clearly told the Americans that they're not going to talk about details about whatever negotiations are happening. But that leaves them really hamstrung in terms of what they're going to tell the Canadian public, because the message that the government is sending out is almost nonsensical. It has no content to it, and there's nothing to show except concession after concession after concession. And even though the Prime Minister got through the meeting with Trump, albeit with some pretty humiliating moments, having to stand beside him while he was making all sorts of nonsensical claims about Canadian tariff rates and what's happening with Golden Dome and all of that. To go through that and then to have Secretary Lutnick punch the auto industry the very next day just shows the difficulty of negotiating in good faith with these guys without any kind of a strategy to communicate to the Canadian public.
These are the quotes, Sherrill, in the Toronto Star, young up-and-coming reporter, Tana McCharles. I think we all know her. This is Howard Lutnick speaking to the Canada-U.S. summit the Prime Minister's are speaking to today as well. If you look at where Canada was to where it will be, this is at the end of all the trade talks, you'll be disappointed. Car assembly is going to be in America, and there's nothing Canada can do about it. The question is, what is Canada going to do instead? Dom LeBlanc, I think, is still in Washington trying to advance the conversations from yesterday, and this is what Lutnick beams into a meeting in Toronto and throws on the table. I mean, what do we make of this whiplash from yesterday to today?
Well, I think it's pretty indicative of what they've been dealing with this whole time. You know, Donald Trump will say something, he'll make some policy. You know, you have people like Lutnick will come out and say something. Whether or not it's exactly what Trump wants, nobody really knows. It depends on who had his ear last. All of those things, it's like, so how do you have those discussions with people when you've been told, as we were told yesterday, that the direction was come to a deal quickly on steel, on auto, on those.
No, just steel and aluminum. Like that's why the auto industry is so worried. They said energy, which is why apparently, so it was steel, aluminum, and energy, and nobody understood what energy was until we found out it was Keystone that was put on the table. So it's those three things. Now, I don't know if there's a priority just for yesterday, but there's a concern about whether it's a priority going forward, right?
Exactly. So when you say you want to get to a deal quickly on these things, but these are the people that you're talking to who have obviously they have their own agenda. It's the same mindset that comes back to, you know, we're going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it. Just because it's being said and just because it's being put on the table, that doesn't necessarily mean that's how it's going to end. But in the meantime, people are, as Jordan said, people are suffering. And without a clear path forward, there's been no lack of I think reporting from people like Jean Charest, from ourselves at the Times, about the lack of transparency in these negotiations and in these talks, and even
in this government more broadly.
Government broadly. So nobody knows what's going on. You see the public face, you see the gabbing and the giggles in the Oval Office, but you don't actually see something tangible. And people have a very much a mentality of, okay, but what have you done for me lately? And if they are seeing prices going up, jobs being lost, and that's on both sides of the border. But if that's not enough to push Donald Trump to move off of his tariff, supremacy, I don't know how far the fact that Canadians are hurting is going to do anything to help.
No, it needs to be pain felt on the other side of the border. But Michelle, wherever this goes, I mean, the auto companies are moving capital to the United States. They're boosting production in the U.S. at the expense of Canada in a lot of cases, and it's very clear that's the direction of things. So even with the positivity on the rhetoric around steel and aluminum, there's no timeline. There's no sense of where it's going to go, and I'm not sure the industry players actually know where this is going to go.
No, and I'm sure they don't. And, I think we all know we're dealing with somebody who is an agent of chaos, and he likes to be that way. It is not going to be as per normal negotiations. And you also can't do it in public. And so, Jordan is right. You are hamstrung as a government in terms of what you can say and what you can't say. I think that, what I would say is that they could probably say a little bit more, not about the specifics, but certainly about kind of more broadly about what they're, broadly trying to achieve, and and just actually articulate a little bit more about some of the struggles and that kind of thing. It's a delicate dance because he does watch what is set up here. And, Donald Trump will be the first person to kind of roar about whatever that is. I will say, I don't think that Mark Carney was treated any worse or any better than any other foreign leader who has walked into the Oval Office. And so I don't think that was necessarily about Canada or about Mark Carney in particular. I think that's just who he is and how he treats people. And so, I do kind of take exception to that. But the worry is real. Families are suffering without question. And, as someone who's looking in from the outside, it is hard to see the path that brings this to a great end.
Well, or even a quick end, because Tim, Goldie Hyder was on the show earlier this week, and he talked about what he's hearing from people in Washington, that there is no urgency to move on these things with Canada, that it's at least the end of the year. And, you look at it, and do they just keep the sectoral pressure on right up until you go into the broader CUSMA negotiation to weaken the Canadian economy and the position of the government to the point that they feel it gives them leverage in the big negotiation that matters for everything?
If there is a coordinated strategy, why wouldn't they? If you're America, but I go back to something Michelle said. These guys love chaos, so why wouldn't Trump's lackey, Lutnick, because he is a lackey, come out and say what he said today? That just is true to form. Instead of a Truth Social post late at night from the president who can say, I didn't say that, it's just Lutnick. That just creates so much pressure on Carney here in Canada. Maybe it does loosen something up. Look, the Prime Minister was in a no-win situation in Washington. You can't really go into your neighbor's house and punch him in the head because everybody wants you to punch him in the head, particularly when your neighbor has all your safe and everything else locked in his cupboards there, i.e. a lot of the trade agreements that are there. This is going to be like this until there's an agreement or Canadians lose patience with the Prime Minister. The opposition has lots of political fodder to pick with. They're going to run with it. But I suspect people will ask, well, could the current leader of the opposition do better? I think go back and list the most instructive thing maybe in the last couple of hours is your interview with Jean Charest. And he makes the point that involves the application of logic, which is weird in these circumstances. I get it, which is, whether it's autos or anything else, it's going to take, I think the phrase Mr. Charest used was tens of years to do this. He's right. This is true with autos, too. Even if they put plants in the U.S., even if they move capital, the production line, 60 years, 70 years, not going to change in one day. So Lutnick, maybe aspirational to be polite, as may the president be, that they're going to have all this auto back. Even in 3 years, they're not going to have all the auto back in the United States. Brings no relief to the people who are disquieted and uncomfortable. But that's the hell we're living in.
But Jordan, we get deeper into this, what if there is no win for Canada in this?
The win might be getting to the 3 years.
Well, it might be, but you know what? More and more I wonder about this because, it may take 10 years to build out those supply chains. You can do a lot of damage to the Canadian economy as we go through this kabuki theater on the trade thing. But just what if there is no win? Because increasingly, you can't see visible signs of progress.
Yeah, look, and I think that's a real possibility. And of course, right now we're talking about specific sectoral deals for relief in key industries. But of course, CUSMA's the huge elephant in the room here. And the risk that that agreement is reopened in a way that exposes the majority of Canadian exports to tariffs is real. And so I think to some degree, the win for the time being may be simply to play for time for the government to gain more space under the current CUSMA rules until things are a little bit more favorable. Unfortunately, if you accept the logic that that moment comes during the U.S. midterm elections, we're talking a year from now.
Yeah.
There's a lot of damage, even with sectoral tariffs just focused where they are right now. There's a ton of damage that can be wreaked on the Canadian economy in that time. And so if that is the move, if that is the plan, then we're going to need to see a whole lot more support for Canadian businesses and Canadian workers in order to get us through that period.
Yeah, and look, when I say is a no win, I don't mean political win for any political. I mean for the country, I mean for the workers, I mean for the economy, because Sherelle, also today, Lutnick is talking about, Canada should cut Mexico out of this and we should do a bilateral deal and saying there's going to be a baseline tariff, things you can never accept as a national government, but which may just be imposed upon you by the United States, right? Like increasingly as you see this, the navigable path is narrower and narrower and more difficult.
It is a difficult path. And thinking about the fact that, don't forget, Donald Trump was the one who negotiated CUSMA, and he's chose to completely ignore it and disregard it to do whatever it is that he wants to do. So banking on saying, okay, well, we'll get a deal that the president is happy with, and then things will be good. That's kind of a bit of a dream scenario, simply because he has shown himself to throw things out, when it no longer suits him. So that being a win, it could just be a temporary salve. And so to get to that, whatever the next step is going to be really difficult for any government who has to deal with not only Donald Trump, but whoever potentially comes next.
Yeah, because Trumpism will probably survive Donald Trump's presidency. I mean, am I being too glum? Am I being too grim? But it is difficult to see a win. I mean, people say it's not going to be a straight line. We're 10 months in to the presidency. There's 38 months to go, right?
Yes, it's true. And I think that there's a lot of Americans who are also having that countdown clock in their head, and as their cities are being changed, and a lot of different things are happening in their social structure. It is depressing. It's really hard to find a glimmer of hope in what's being said. I guess if I was looking for one, it would be that they're still at the table, that there still are some conversations, that there are things that Donald Trump wants of our country that we have. And so we do have some cards to play. And it's not as many as the U.S. because we need that market, but we do have some cards. Hopefully those that are dealing them out are being wise and gonna put them out judiciously.
No, still at the table, but Tim, he just tariffed tables, right? Cabinets, more lumber products, all of these things. It just gets harder and harder. I give you the last word on.
Hard to drink beer.
Well, what if there is no win? Seriously, what is a win at this point?
Those bilateral agreements, I guess. I mean, the government has got to try and if watching the Prime Minister in question period, I mean, he's obviously enthusiastic and verbose as they tend to be in theatrical. I think he's got to start to be more careful. He's got to find that balance between managing an expectation that something can be done and the fact that maybe nothing can be. The win for Canada may be how well it backstops its people if things with the U.S. are as bad as they are. Though I will say this, David, and taking it back to our home province, what we have seen before is let's not put all the American people in the same boat as the president. There are a lot of wise American people who at a certain point too, when the economy goes in a direction they don't like, have to have faith in them. And I think we should take some hope and aspiration from the base of America that at some point it will say enough of this is enough.
Well, that is true, but America has fundamentally changed in the last 10 years.
It has.
There's no question about it. What's being tolerated there now is a remarkable thing that everyone in the world has to deal with.